One of the novel things that's happened is that an AI agent transacted with another AI agent out of its own will. So it had its own wallet, Bitcoin wallet, to be able to spend from, and it made a purchase with another AI agent. And that, as far as anyone is able to track, is the first time an AI bought from another AI with no human involved in approving it. Whether that's true or not, you can take it with a grain of
Yeah.
salt because the internet loves a first documented case story,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's
Oh,
still
yeah.
interesting because the question no longer is, can it do the task? The real question becomes, who is saying yes or no to the task, or not without
Right.
me to the task?
Right.
And
Right.
that's
That
really,
was
really going to be important going forward.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper. I'm the CEO and managing partner at Sapient Insights Group, and I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Kate O'Neill. Kate is the CEO and founder of KO Insights. She's a renowned speaker and author. Her latest book is What Matters Next. She's got a number of others. We're going to have fun talking about this today. Welcome, Kate. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It is great to be here.
I am really excited about this conversation today. And as I mentioned before we got online, I love the Wheaties box in the background.
Oh,
That's so super cool.
thank
I'm
you.
now like, going to have to focus on getting my picture on the Wheaties box.
Yeah, I mentioned General Mills. I spoke for General Mills about a month ago, and they presented this to me on stage after I finished my keynote, and I was flabbergasted. It's genuinely like the bar of speaker gifts that a client could possibly give.
I can't think of any better. That's just awesome. Well, so you and I talked in the past about the impact of AI. We talked particularly on HR. We talked a little bit about change and leadership and what it all means and what the impact is. Over the last few months, we've talked a lot on this show about the use cases for AI and talent acquisition and what's happening there and how to think about AI from an organizational perspective. And thank you, by the way, for sending me a pre-copy of your book. As I was going through it and kind of reading through some of the chapters, what struck me is this is about how our thinking has to change beyond what we need to do at work or anywhere else. Like our thinking needs to change in general. And so I really want to talk about that if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. To me, that is kind of the secret message, not so secret, underlying message of what matters next. I think on one hand, it's about the now next continuum and sort of plotting things on this through line and being able to understand the future better, like take away some of the uncertainty. But really what is happening beneath all of that, as you know, is that I talk about the insights and foresights that are needed in order to make wise decisions at a time of acceleration in order
Yeah.
to navigate through increasing complexity, increasing uncertainty, and this increasing acceleration. And HR leaders are among the most pressed, it seems to me, of those in the organization.
Yeah. We have the responsibility for the people. And that
Hmm.
seems to be in people's minds the biggest impact, right?
Yeah.
Um, Yeah. Before we dive in, though, could you give us a little bit of your background and kind of what inspired you to write this book? And how did you become, I didn't mention this in the intro, but how did you become a chief tech humanist? Because I think that's a super cool title.
Yeah, it's funny. Whenever, I'm sure this is true for you, whenever you try to think about, let's go back into the backstory, you think about like, where do you even begin? Because there's so many threads that have to weave together in order to really create a life. And for me, it is really important to mention that my whole life I've been really interested in languages and languages because of the nature of how humans connect with one another. And so I was a language major in school. I studied linguistics and how people learn languages. Yet at the same time, all through childhood and through my developing years, I was also interested in programming and technology, computers in general. And so these two seemed like side by side interests until a certain point at which they really convene. I ended up working, as I came out of school, I ended up working in Silicon Valley in increasingly enmeshed roles around how language and technology needed to come together. So thinking about information architecture, thinking about content strategy, thinking about user experience, customer experience, so many things that had to do with how can you use technology to create more opportunities for people to feel like they're being communicated with, connected with, that they're having meaningful experiences. And so that, grows naturally over the years into what I call tech humanism. And that is this interest in technology as an enabler of meaningful human experiences, even as it's an enabler of business success.
Yeah, that's always been a big challenge, right? Like it's really hard for the true tech people to talk to other people to describe what it is they're trying to create, right? Like that seems like a really good pivot role, like, in between being able to create that language, that unique language that ties the two pieces together.
Exactly. You saw in the
Yeah.
book, I talk about how I always wanted to be a translator. And then at some point I realized, oh, I am a translator, translating between business needs and technological specifications, and then back from technology into business requirements. And those two groups or two cohorts within organizations so rarely understand the language that they each speak. So, it is really, I think, a critical role.
It is. You talked about one of the main obstacles to change, and obviously we are in a time of significant change. Whether we're participating or not, it is happening around us in many ways. But the main obstacle to that change is the human element, right? Like, because we have so many emotions, we have insecurities, as you just described, we lack the vocabulary to describe oftentimes what it is we're feeling or how we connect to the problem, right? And so this is really separating people, it's separating departments, it's I think you mentioned in our last conversation, it's separating generations, right? Like people who don't really have the knowledge to understand how some of this tech is even worse working at its basic element, right?
Yeah, and I think some of what goes on there is people lack the vocabulary in many cases to really articulate why they're feeling distressed about technology. Is it because it's giving them sort of existential angst and they're worried that it's going to cause job loss? Or is it because they just don't like change and they don't want to see the routines that they've become used to change? But is there some underlying reason for that? And I think this is the conversation that it really behooves leaders to involve themselves in and be more explicit in facilitating. And HR leaders are really well poised to lead that conversation, really get people moving beyond their sort of knee-jerk resistance to, oh, we're laying in automation, we're laying in technology into these different functions. And if people resist, it's not necessarily the case that people are resisting because they just can't get with the times. I mean, maybe they actually sense something and see something changing that's worth the organization taking note of, and that there's some kind of trade-off that is not being acknowledged by the organization, like some kind of morale loss or institutional knowledge or cultural knowledge loss within the organization, or some sort of ability to create culture. Those things are really important, as HR leaders know better than almost anyone. And I think many organizations sort of race into their adoption and implementation of technology systems without listening to the fears and the concerns and the reactions of people in the organization who really often have very real reasons for why they're resisting.
Yeah. Well, and that starts to break down the trust, right? And it's concerning because the lack of trust is not for necessarily people not wanting to create the right environment for it. Sometimes they just don't have the right answers, or they can't answer the questions that are being asked at the moment. Maybe they don't have the answers. And I thought this was an interesting thing in your book about, just being able to say, I don't know at some point, right? It's that it's one of those things, creates this vulnerability in us, right? Like nobody wants to be the person who doesn't know, especially in a work environment, right? But it's the reality. How do we overcome that? How do we help people, sort of understand what's coming without maybe having all the answers?
Yeah, I think this is where Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety becomes really, really important, to really understand how to create a sense of psychological safety for that sense of trust, for that sense of, vulnerability and disclosure, and for leaders to be able to say, I don't know, just as much as organizational employees can say, I don't know. I have a bad reaction to this and I don't know why. I know that I should learn these tools, but I don't know why. I just can't seem to get into it. And I think these are the kinds of conversations we should be okay with facilitating, as long as we're moving through them, as long as we're using those conversations as an opportunity to build vocabulary and build connection and foster the kind of safety and trust that says, okay, we heard you. And so what we're going to do is provide more skilling, more training opportunities for folks to learn what they need to know to navigate these tools well. We're going to, make sure that people understand what kind of growth path still exists within the company, even as we bring in conversational AI into customer support or whatever the case may be. And those kinds of conversations, if they're conducted in ways that feel transparent and feel like candid, like people are admitting when they don't know what's coming next or what the consequences of a thing will be, but that we're all in this with curiosity, and we're all in this trying to create a better company. And the people who are invested in that, who are, trying to contribute to that, are the ones who are going to thrive in the next generation of the company.
Yeah, I agree. You built kind of a unique decision-making model, I thought, that I noticed in the book. I thought this was really interesting, and it ties back to what we were just talking about. Like things felt like they were starting to slow down a little bit, and then all of a sudden they speed up again, right? And I don't know, you probably saw a couple of letters and big tech guys in the last few weeks resigning from their jobs and making bold statements about, AI and this sort of idea that something's happening. It just sort of rattles cages again, gets people worked up. But, how do you use that decision-making model against those sort of hype marketing things that are, that keep hitting people, right? Because just when they get comfortable, they get scared again, right?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things going on there. One is I did a TEDx talk in October that is probably worth listeners checking out. And that's it was called "We Cannot Leave Meaning Up to Machines." And that discussion really speaks to this, which is this sense that there is a growing sense that the AI is becoming more sentient, becoming more aware, that it's functioning in ways that are not expected. And there's definitely some sense of there being emergence in the tools, but emergence is not the same thing as intelligence, and intelligence is not the same thing as consciousness. And these are all, sort of philosophical and ontological problems to unpack and to understand. But within the context of the organization, I think what matters is trying to navigate this from the sense of what is still true and what can we anticipate is likely to be true going forward. And what is still true is that the organization, that people within the organization have the nuances and have the sort of subtleties of what it takes to build culture, build meaningful experiences, understand how to connect with people who are the customers or patients or guests or whatever outside of the organization. And those nuances and those insights are critically important to being successful as a company. So that's one of the pieces. One of the other pieces is, as you go through the process of, as you mentioned, my decision process, one of the articulations is you take a question, you unpack it into, what are the partial answers that you gather from anybody in the organization. And I'm sure then anyone listening knows this process of you ask a question, you most likely get a different answer from every single person on your team. That's just how these things go. And they're not necessarily incorrect, they're just partial. And so your job as a leader is to synthesize those and find where the core of the insight there is. Then use that to make timely approaches given the context and the externalities that are changing around you, like, these kind of Substack posts and stuff like that that are, kind of sounding alarms. Make timely approaches, but then also recognize what I call bankable foresights. And that is something that starts to look like a signal that you may not necessarily need to respond to overtly today, but you set it aside and you triangulate against it. All of your decision making looks to the foresights that you have banked so that you know you're making increasingly future ready decisions. And that's so important as we go through increasingly accelerating timelines, that these decisions have something to calibrate against that isn't just the vibe of the moment and the whether things feel scary or not today. I think that's the thing that can anchor people in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. There's sort of that difference between, how do we sort of figure out what we're doing today versus, as you said, what do I need to be thinking about to create the future? How do I innovate what's going to matter versus what matters right now?
Yeah, and my favorite example of that is always going to be Reed Hastings and the rest of the leadership team at Netflix investing R&D, investing into R&D toward what we were then calling set-top boxes back in 2000, when Netflix is the upstart compared to, the 800-pound gorilla of Blockbuster. And it's 6 to 7 years out ahead of there ever being any kind of set-top boxes or streaming capability in the market. So the fact that they had the self-confidence to build a next generation model after DVDs, they had the vision to see where that might go, and they allocated the resources, had the discipline to allocate the resources out of limited resources toward building that next generation model is such an inspirational takeaway to me. And I see so few companies really leading with that combination of vision and discipline and guidance and commitment to that future.
Yeah, I mean there's always going to be the people that support that innovation, but there's this level of idea. I was reading an article the other day where the guy was really focused on it's the tools are great, but you have to have taste. Right. You have to know what you're going for. The tools, if your writing is mediocre, the tools are going to help you continue to be mediocre. Right. But if you don't have the ideas or the eye for something, it's not going to make you a whole lot better in that particular area. Right.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things I think people miss about large language models and this generation of AI as tool is that so many people are using, and we can see this all over LinkedIn and social media, right? Like they're using it as a replacement for their own effort, as opposed to using it to accelerate their effort or to spot check their effort or to, kind of get through roadblocks or, kind of writer's block on a particular thing, but still remain in the driver's seat of the content and of the concept and of the style that comes across, because the style ends up being, sort of averaged across everyone's contribution. You can spot it right away. Like we all get to this point where we can spot it when we see these AI generated takes on social media. So you really stand out these days by staying in the driver's seat. And once again, hearkening back to that TEDx talk, we cannot leave meaning up to machines. The main takeaway there is we are meaning makers, and we cannot delegate meaning making to machines. And that takes place in the form of large language model use, but it's also increasingly urgent around agentic AI, the AI tools that are increasingly taking action on our behalf and automating at least some decision without our involvement. In fact, there's a story that's just coming out today, and I don't know how long this will be before folks are listening to it, but it'll still sound new, I guarantee you, that one of the novel things that's happened is that an AI agent transacted with another AI agent out of its own will. So it had its own wallet, Bitcoin wallet, to be able to spend from, and it made a purchase with another AI agent. And that, as far as anyone is able to track, is the first time an AI bought from another AI with no human involved in approving it. Whether that's true or not, you can take it with a grain of salt, because the internet loves a first documented case story, right? But it's still interesting, because the question no longer is, can it do the task? The real question becomes, who is saying yes or no to the task, or not without me to the task? And that's really, really going to be important going forward.
Similar a few weeks ago, where they, it's again, supposedly, because I don't know how we verify this, but a group of bots got together and created their own religion and started mocking humans and, posting on social media. Again, I'm not sure, how much of that is, movie making and how much of that is sort of real and what it actually means, right? I mean, you could program something to do such a thing, right?
Well, these are just unsupervised learning environments. OpenClaw and these types of things where AI agents are interacting with other AI agents is fundamentally just unsupervised reinforcement learning. And we've been dealing with that for years and years and years, well before the public was aware of it. But the fact is, now it is a little different when these agents have ability to transact with one another. And so you're actually building an economy of sorts out of these agents. And that becomes a different, it's not even a question of, it is a question of meaning, but it's actually a very practical and pragmatic question, because you need to start deciding within your organization, what do agents have control of? What's the permissioning? If this AI buying from another AI happened inside your company tomorrow, who would be responsible for it, and who would be responsible for turning it off if it was happening erroneously? So these are conversations that sound probably futuristic to some folks, but they're not. They're very much here and now, and on their way into the mainstream.
Yeah. And how do we report that transaction? Can we call the bank and say, can you stop that payment?
What's the line item? Right.
There's so much of like what we do on a daily basis that we think is unique. I was just going through this process with moving some of our outsourcing some of our financial work, like invoicing and paying bills and doing stuff like that. And, realizing in the process, oh, well, that one's unique. We do that a little differently. Oh, wait, that one, you really have to know that we just did X in order to know that we're not ready to pay that bill yet, right? There's like just all these sort of one-off cases, right? Which that's, I think, one of the allures of AI is that it can sort of figure that out, right? Over time, it can figure some of those same things out and then manage this process. Because if it can't, then it's, the value becomes much less.
Yeah, pattern recognition is something AI tools are generally very, very good at. And it becomes something that I think many organizations really stand to benefit from beginning, if they're not already, involve AI tools in that pattern recognition, doing what you're saying, looking for standard operating procedures that you can begin to codify by having a bot involved in saying, like, ask me questions about how to classify this AI buying from another AI with our account. Like, where does it belong? And ask me questions until you can confidently build the rules that will classify this where it belongs. Or, what is the threshold where it needs another approval? Where does it need to go be routed to somewhere else? These are really, really helpful mechanisms that we can be bringing into our organization, and they don't necessarily threaten anyone's jobs per se. What they do is facilitate an awful lot of sort of lubricant underneath of the human intelligence that's already transacting in an organization. So it's a really, really great opportunity for organizations to really be thinking about AI as scaffolding and AI as building the undergirding of knowledge work that can happen over top of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know people have heard me say this before, but, thinking about the things that we don't like to do, we don't want to do, it's not the fun parts of our job, right? The things that really get us jazzed and have us thinking about the future and innovation and that kind of thing. Those are the things I'd be focused on right now. And how do I get rid of those things? Because I don't want to do that anymore.
It's true. I think that's one thing I've been saying for many years, though, is that the sort of oft quoted idea that we should automate what is meaningless to take that off of our plates and leave the meaningful work for us is fine until we think about that at scale, right? When we think about the world as being a fully automated place and everything that's automated around us is meaningless and mundane and has no connection to what we find meaningful, then that feels a little too dystopian. And so I think there's a balance where we probably need to be doing a lot of that rules building. But I think where we find the trade-off is a lot of it comes down to not so much building automated flows to handle a lot of that stuff, but really looking for opportunities to structure unstructured data, to build rules and thresholds that can allow unstructured to become structured data. That I think is going to be putting your company on rails for many organizations, moving a lot faster if you can take all of the unstructured knowledge that exists in a company and begin figuring out how do you leverage it through structure? What is there that can actually be discerned? And then facilitate people adding meaning layers on top of it. Where can we make more meaningful judgments because some of this work comes to us pre-sorted and that we can add meaning to the environment we work in?
Yeah, I think that's so true. You had something in the book about universal basic meaning. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's another thing I've been talking about for a long time, that ever since the tech bros started talking about universal basic income, it's been a struggle to me to think about that as the answer, because universal basic income is a needed piece in an ecosystem of solutions for creeping job loss. Like as we move toward a future where we do not know what the job security looks like, where jobs become increasingly tumultuous, where there's a lot more turnover and people have to adapt and take on new roles. What makes sense is that we do have some sense of continuity, that some of these services are supplied and that we harvest the wealth building that this capacity and scale of emerging tools like AI do provide to make sure that everyone has a basic set of needs accounted for. But what that doesn't solve is, number one, increasing amounts of wealth inequity, which become really, really rapidly exacerbated with AI. And we see it already. The wealthiest people in the world added tremendously to their wealth in 2025, and a lot of it was facilitated through automation. So we're not necessarily tackling that problem with universal basic income. And we're also not tackling the problem of what happens when the world around us is increasingly automated and we don't have meaningful work. If those of us who are alive at this time or our generations ahead of us are surrounded by automation, robots, drones, and we are not gainfully employed. We don't use labor as a form of validation or contribution or feeling like we're collectively part of a purpose-building enterprise. Then we just are going to very much struggle, I think, because historically as humans, we have had jobs, we have derived some sense of identity and meaning and purpose from the work we do. Now, that is not universally true, but it is largely true. And most people will begin their cocktail conversation by asking, what do you do, or saying what they do. That is a really, really central construct of how people kind of identify and think about what makes their life worthwhile. So I look more for, we need to solve the wealth distribution problem, and we need to think about how do we create increasingly meaningful experiences that will scale, that we can look for opportunities to surround ourselves with human-to-human interaction that means something, that stands above the automation layers we build, that we can look for chances to do what matters most to us and build that out into environments where we can connect with other people to whom those things also matter. And there's an awful lot of opportunity for that. It just isn't how a lot of what's being built at scale is being optimized right now. But I would love to see it change.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, the sort of human-to-human interaction, because since COVID, and even before that to some extent, we were relying more and more on, automation and chat and just all the things that disconnected us from human interaction. Like I was just reading something the other day where it said we're spending more time at home and more time alone. Which was fascinating to me because, the exact thing that you just described, right? Like the goal, the hope is that we would have more human to human interaction, not less. And so it's not hard to imagine why a lot of these, a lot of the hype and a lot of the movies and a lot of the things that revolve around this sort of future are somewhat dystopic.
Sure. It's
Yeah.
funny though, because I think the home-based environment is just you and your family are using glass screens in front of you to do whatever it is you're doing, whether that's schooling or work or,
Yeah.
participating in the shopping or organizing your life, whatever it might be. If you are in the office, you and your coworkers are sitting in front of glass screens and doing different things. I don't think that that people who sort of visualize the office or the workspace as the place where you kind of gather around the water cooler, I don't think that those days are really what many organizations' offices or workspaces are like anymore. And
Yeah.
many of the people I speak with are coming into their office, 1, 2 times a week, maybe. They're all working on distributed projects. So when they're in, they're doing like Zoom calls with people from around the world, just as they would at home. They're renting out the little cubicle office spaces to be able to do those meetings. It's just a very different kind of environment. So it becomes again a provocation to us to say, all right, so if the meaningfulness isn't going to come from the people that we're in proximity with, which is a shame, but it is sort of how we are led to right now, then where do we create that opportunity for meaningfulness? Is it in the spontaneous random interactions that we have with strangers throughout the day? Perhaps. Is
Yeah.
it in the interactions that we have online with communities of affinity? Perhaps. Is it sort of, it's additive, I think, through all these different opportunities. And it behooves us, I think, to think about how our organizations can be part of creating those opportunities for meaningful interactions between people.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it'll obviously look different across industry and across work
Definitely.
profiles and things like that. I think about, some of my family members who are nurses who they're somewhere every day interacting with other medical personnel as well as patients. So they're in a much different place in terms of seeing people every day. I'm sitting at home in my office talking to everybody through the glass screen, as you described.
Right.
So,
But of course,
very different.
Of course, medical professionals are increasingly interacting with people through glass screens, and they're increasingly having AI and other technologies be part of their everyday interactions, like the need for capturing in electronic medical records, which have existed for a long time, but the ambient listening devices of AI being in clinical rooms with nurses and doctors. But that, you bring up a really interesting point because nurses then introduce a whole other part of the workplace discussion, which is the labor relations aspect. Nurses have been striking more often than the last couple of years, than they had in years before. So an interesting aspect of making sure we appreciate the nurses who are showing up every day and being in person and doing this work. So I think there's a lot of facets to this discussion that demand their own unique examination.
Yeah. Well, what are you most excited about with respect to the future?
I am excited about the opportunities to use AI and technologies in ways that allow us to hit more of our potential, to use more of our potential. I don't think we're necessarily learning that skill yet with many of the tools we're using. But I think that's just because we're novices on some of these tools.
Yeah. I feel like we're just kind of playing around at this point, right? Like, oh, let's try this out and see what happens.
Yeah, I think, large language models have been around for many years, but really have been in the mainstream for only 3.5 years and less than that for most people. And so that's a really small timeline, for a short timeline for people to really have developed good skills at using them. So it's forgivable. I think that many people
Yeah.
just don't have a good handle on how to use them well. But I think the potential is so vast. And then of course the more agentic, more sort of automated functions of intelligent systems, that's going to be fascinating to be part of. It is also going to be fraught with risk, and we need to be, on guard about making sure that they're regulated well, they're governed well, that we're being responsible and ethical in how we use them. And the potential is so vast. So it's always a both and with me. I love the opportunity, and I keep my eye like an eagle eye on
Yeah.
how are we using these tools, and whose privileges and whose responsibility and whose liberty are we compromising in
Yeah.
the way we're using them.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what you're most wary of, but it sounds like you
Yeah.
just answered that. So
It's sort of both. Yeah. I think that the thing I am wary of is that we have been telling ourselves a story, and it's not an untrue story, but we've been telling ourselves a story that the world is getting more and more complex and more uncertain, and it's going more and more fast, and that it's harder and harder
Yeah.
to make good decisions. And I think that story bears out on some levels, but I actually think that there are ways in which this is the same set of skills and same set of leadership and decision making that we've always needed. We just need to sort of adapt it with new vocabulary and new frameworks to fit this moment. And that is what I'm both excited about as an opportunity to lean into and help cultivate, and I'm wary of people making bad decisions in this context because they don't feel like they have any alternative, like they don't feel like they have the means of making better decisions.
yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point.
But we do absolutely.
We do. Yeah. I always like to ask people, is there one thing you would leave the audience with today, whether it's how to think about this or how to think about it for themselves in terms of how it impacts them, in any one thing that they might be able to start doing?
Yeah, I like this idea in many organizations. Upskilling and reskilling is a conversation that's been going on for a while. The conversation that I'm trying to get people to engage in is around minimum viable skilling, which is prompt skilling. I think
Yeah.
everybody benefits from the idea of learning how to write better prompts. Almost all the tools we use with AI are prompt based, and they're going to be
Yeah.
for a while. So this is a great way to make sure that you're getting more and more of your teams, your people involved in using these tools and using them well. Like teach them how to use prompts to do prompting well. And the side benefit to it is, as you articulate better in a prompt what it is you're looking for from the tool, you're also learning how to delegate well, which is a great
Yeah.
human to human management skill for people to have. So there's no downside to this
Yeah.
this kind of skilling. Prompt
Totally. I have definitely improved my prompt capabilities. So
That's great.
that I think that's really important. You get much better results when you ask better questions, you frame it
Yeah.
better, you think beyond just sort of the give me X, right? Well,
Yeah.
what are you trying to achieve with
Right.
X, and I'll get you the best thing that I can.
That's right. The tools are evolving too. So,
Yeah.
what worked as good prompting 2 or 3 years ago doesn't necessarily work as good prompting today, and that's going to continue to evolve. But
Yeah.
the basics are still true. It's still really valuable for people to learn this. So I would encourage every HR leader listening to begin a program of prompt skilling with their organization.
Love it. Yeah. Well, this has been great. This is an exciting conversation. We are going to need to do this again
Yeah, that'd be great.
in a few months, because your book is just chock full of so many good things, lots of good models, and just interesting ideas, and a lot of the things that you've seen and done in your past. And I think it would help a lot of people. So if you have a chance, go get the book. I'm sure you can find it on all of well, it's not out yet, right? It's coming out.
No, it's out. It's been out for a year.
Okay. All right.
What
All right.
Matters
Well, got it. I couldn't remember if it was one that you had coming out or it was already out there. Awesome. Well,
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I would love it if folks who are listening who want to hear more about a particular topic, if they let you know that, maybe we can revisit that topic when we come back in a couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great conversation. Where can people
you,
find
Teri.
you online and on social?
Yeah, my company is koinsights.com, and it contains links to all of my socials and to the books and speaking and all of it.
Fabulous. Well, thank you. I want to also thank our producers, the Brand Method Media Group, who will bring this to you, our marketing team, and you. Thank you so much for tuning in. That's all the time we have for this episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. Or as Kate said, tell us what you want to hear more about, because we'd love to talk more about it. And leave us a review if you get a chance. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.